Yeah, with the one we like.
Do we need these really close?
No, that's fine, we can hear you.
Can everybody hear through this microphone okay? Wave at me at the back, please. Yes, thank you. So, well, people are just getting their food. So we will kick off in about 30 seconds time or so. Just let everybody get the last sandwiches. Apologies if you're slightly cold. The heating is being fixed, we understand, and there will occasionally be a loud fan-like noise behind us, which is warming us all up.
It will be warm when we leave.
Yes.
Okay, well, with apologies to people who are still getting their food, we are going to start. We've got a fairly short and concise session today. Welcome to this ResPublica Fringe, which is delivered today in partnership with the Carers Trust and with Advance. And we're going to be hearing from them in a minute. ResPublica, if you're not already familiar, is an independent, non-partisan think tank. And it's based on the premise that human relationships should once more be the centre and the meaning of a society based on the common good. So I think it's very appropriate that ResPublica is now taking a really serious interest in health and social care. And we're going to have a discussion about making care personal, about sharing the care, and if the previous incarnations of this discussion have been anything to go by, we're going to get into some of the really tricky issues around choice and the mechanisms of choice, and how that relates to living a good life. So because this is a ResPublica Fringe and it's not any old fringe, I'm not going to start with the usual list of demographic time bombs and a litany of recent care scandals, or a run through of all the cost challenges. I'm going to take that as read. If you if you're not aware of all those pressures on the system, then you live in a far happier world than I do, and I want to join you in it. I think it's true that all public services are quaking at the moment, and the collision between the plummeting resources graph and the skyrocketing demand graph, and social care is no exception to that. Social care is also wrestling with the low profile in comparison to other services, notably the NHS. But I think it's worth saying that whilst the hospital of 2012 looks a lot like the hospital of 1912 and arguably of 1812, just with more machines in it that go bleep, social care has reformed itself out of all recognition, I'd argue, in the last 30 years. We have come a long way. But that revolution, which has led to more and more people living in their own homes and their own communities, and a decreasing use of large buildings, that revolution is very much unfinished. So you may find that in 2012 you can if you use social care, you may well be able to take the money instead of the service. You may well be able to spend the resources allocated to you as you see fit. But you might find that those mechanisms of choice aren't necessarily reflected by a wide range of diverse services in your local area from which to choose. And you might find that even if you are fortunate enough to receive a very well tailored and high quality service, that it doesn't add up to a good life. So to reflect on some of those issues, I'm going to start by welcoming our first speaker. I'm very pleased that we're welcoming Stephen Dorrell, the Right Honourable Stephen Dorrell MP, who is of course Chair of the Health Select Committee, a former Secretary of State for Health, and one of the most respected voices on health and social care in Parliament. Stephen.
kind of you, and thank you very much for arranging this event. Convenient outside the conference centre, and I'll try to make myself heard above the sound effects behind me. Looking around the room, there are one or two who've already heard me talking on related subjects twice today, so I will try not to cover the familiar ground that you aimed us off of the Nicholson challenge and the money and the immediate resource issues facing the health and care system. I thought what I'd do is start with a different proposition, which is that I think sometimes when people look at this subject, they are in danger of approaching it as an actuary. And they convince themselves that because people are living longer and because there are more people living at home and placing more demands on the system, somehow this is bad news. For me, the fact that we are able to live longer and that technology in various different forms, and I'll come on to that, allows us not merely to live longer but the opportunity to get more out of a longer life, that is good news. And what we should be approaching this subject from the standpoint of people who want to make the best of a success story rather than being convinced that this is an insoluble problem that is going to bring an end to something that we're familiar with and like rather more in retrospect than we did at the time. So the challenge for us from a policy point of view is how to turn that good news story and ensure that we maximise the benefit to our society, to our families, and ultimately to ourselves, available from the longer life that we can all expect to enjoy. Now, the way we do that is surely by recognising that the care needs of those people living longer lives, their needs are dramatically different from the needs of our parents' generation, and a system that grew up to meet those needs in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s. You said that the social care system has changed over the last 20 years, and yes, it's changed. But if we look forward over 20 years, the extent to which the social care system and the rest of the care system around social care, so social housing, the community health system, the primary health care system, the extent to which all of those systems need to change to reflect the needs of today's longer lived generation seems to me one of the big leaps of imagination that actually the political class, the policy class, is having some difficulty imagining, particularly against the background of the resource constraints that shape so much of the rest of political debate. So imagine for a moment a world where instead of being an individual who is expected to go and see a GP, and then when the GP's half understood or understood half of the person in front of them, then they go to the social services department, and then maybe they go to the housing department, and you take yourself off around different bits of the bureaucracy. Imagine for a second that as you live a longer life, there is a world where the different bits of the social and healthcare system are targeted not at the needs of the normally healthy adult who goes in to be diagnosed, goes into hospital, treated, walk out healthy, but actually the health and care system is focused on your need because you are, as you get older, the majority patient demand on the system. The system has, of course, to continue to meet A&E requirements, has, of course, to continue to meet elective surgery requirements, but the majority of the demands placed upon it are for something much less familiar in the context of acute hospitals. They are to provide support and care to enable you in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and increasingly even beyond that, to get more out of life, to have access to a range of supportive care services that allow you to make choices, respect your own views about what you want to enable you to lead your life, and sees the hospital as a reserve service that we try to avoid using, rather than the default option that we send you to because we can't think of anywhere better to send you. That's the care system we should be seeking to evolve. One that supports you, listens to you, provides as much as possible for you in or close to your own home, with your family in support, with carer support as well, and recognises that acute medicine is what we're seeking to avoid, not what we're seeking to plan for. That's my starting point.
Thank you. Clapping as well, because that's well worth a round of applause. It's sort of almost like a national health service rather than a national illness service.
That's a good phrase, we might catch on.
So thank you very much. Thea Stein is Chief Executive of the Carers Trust, which is the merger of the Princess Royal Trust for Carers and Crossroads Care. And Thea is I think you're still allowed to say you're the very new...
I think up to 4 weeks.
4 weeks, so we'll allow Thea very new, yeah.
I think you are, yeah.
And Thea started her career as a clinical psychologist and family therapist, has worked in a number of NHS and council roles, and recently in a regional development agency. Thea.
Thanks. Yes, I've started saying that Carers Trust is the largest charity that you've never heard of, and that's because the merger only took place on the 1st of April. But we do have a UK-wide footprint, and we, just so you understand the position that I'm coming from, we support a network of services that support carers from the age of, the youngest we have that I found so far is 6 years old, and the eldest carer is in their 90s, and they're caring for people from babies to people in their late 90s or indeed hundreds. So it's the whole gamut of carers and cared for. And I guess when we were talking about this panel, the part of the panel that is outlined on the paperwork in front of you is very much the part of the market which is about the development of social enterprise, about micro businesses, about how you stimulate the market for this world of choice, for this world of personalisation and personal care. The approach and the key points that I really want to focus on is that market making is in two parts. You make a market because of the way in which you create that marketplace, and you also create a market because of the way in which you support, develop, educate, nurture the consumer to understand that market and be part of it. The approach from Carers Trust is very much from both sides, but particularly today, to focus on how do you ensure that the person of the future really understands and takes advantage of what personalisation and personal care is all about. And I think we sometimes take it for granted that an intelligent, articulate person will be able to find their way around this system and will take the opportunity of personal care or indeed personalisation. Those of us who've worked within the system know, of course, that's far from the case, and it's not something that's simply in a group of people who may be particularly elderly or particularly frail or have particular needs. Actually, all of us need to learn. I tried to remember the first time I walked into a Yo Sushi and I saw the fact that food went round on a conveyor belt. Now I have to think it's a marvellous idea, and you know how to work it and you know what to do. But for just 2 minutes, somebody had to explain to me the different colour plates and the way in which the conveyor belt worked and what I was supposed to do and how I paid. It didn't take long, but there was a tiny bit of education of me as a consumer that went on. One of the things that Carers Trust has done over a period, some of the legacy organisations that now form part of Carers Trust, is look at the need to educate a consumer around a new market, and have simply done training and support for carers. Now, carers could be a carer who's looking at their own caring allowance and what they can spend to purchase for themselves, or indeed a carer who's looking at working with the person that they care for as well as for themselves. And lo and behold, you find that those people who've said, you know what, I'd like a managed service. I don't really want to take it on myself. And a managed service isn't tremendously different often from a commission service. after some training and some support from their peer group of mothers, say, do you know what, actually I quite like to do this myself. This is something I can understand and I can manage. But one of the gaps in the system and in market making has often been the education of that individual. It's really not rocket science, it's really not terribly complicated, but it can be completely transformational. On the paperwork that you were given for this event, it's got a little link to a YouTube video which shows some of the training in action. And one of the side effects of doing training and development support for people has been the friendships that they have made within that training. And again, think of your own experience. Think of something that you found scary or you found difficult or you thought this was the first time you've done it. Many of us may choose to go with a friend. You may say, you know what, I'm going to feel a little bit unsure about going to Conservative Party conference for the first time. Maybe when I walk through the door, it'd be quite nice to walk through the door for the first time next to somebody I know. So I'm not actually in that big room all on my own. We do that all the time. But actually the way in which we allow carers to bring somebody with them, to have a friend alongside them, it's like we're giving them a favour, we're doing something. Personalisation of personal care just takes some thought and reflection. It's not rocket science, but you won't make the market work without it.
Thank you very much. Okay, and Tim Cooper and Sarah Cookson are both here representing Advance. So Tim is the Chief Executive of Advance UK, which is a charitable business providing housing, support and employment services to meet the needs of people in the community who either have a learning disability or a mental health condition. Tim.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I guess when you stand back and think about it, life for most of us is fairly messy. We move house, we change jobs. If we have a mortgage, you hunt around and can find the best rate. But we all, to lesser or greater degree, have choice and control how we go about managing that messy part of our lives. But it means that my life is different to my neighbours. It's sort of different to the bloke who lives down the road. It's not always neat and tidy. And indeed, what suits me this year is rather different from what suited me 10 years ago. If, however, you're a disabled person and you're reliant on the state to support, you do need to conform. You need to fit into nice, tidy boxes, and you need to take what's available off the list, basically. And over the next 10 minutes, so I think the point that kind of Sarah and I want to get across is that in order to make kind of personalisation a reality for disabled people, what is needed is not more policy, more process, but actually a shift in behaviour, a shift in the way that we act. So if you're a disabled person using social care services, it can feel to be quite a command and control economy. You can break out and express your own individuality, but it's not easy. And most disabled people will tell you that actually it's fairly knackering. Personalisation as a concept, I think now is fairly well accepted across on kind of bipartisan basis as a positive. However, we're still at the stage really of thinking of it as policy, as process, as procedures that we need to apply to people's lives rather than a way of life or indeed a set of behaviour. Now, I mean, Nick Danaher, a veteran campaigner for independent living for disabled people who sadly passed away earlier this year, told me a little story. He said, Tim, good news. The local authorities, two local authorities in the NHS in the area in which I live have developed a common assessment framework. They're all going to assess my needs on the same basis. The bad news is they all want to fill out forms separately. And I think that what that kind of demonstrates is that we've got forms of personalisation, but we have missed the point. It isn't about filling out forms in a common fashion. So we need all of those to act and behave differently. And by we, I mean policymakers in central government, I mean commissioners in local government, and I mean providers like Advance in the third sector. Now, as Alex said, I work for Advance. We're an organisation. We provide housing, support and employment services. We are on that journey of learning to let go and to release control. We've made some progress, but we need to do more. We're a fairly large organisation, so we work across most of England. We've had to employ over 600 people. But what we've recognised is that to be really successful and to meet the needs of our customers, we do have to really be part of local communities and engage with, at a very small, at a micro level, in the way that we operate. So we're starting to develop delivery partnerships with quite different organisations than we've worked with in the past. ECDP is a much smaller organisation based in Essex. It's a user-led organisation controlled and run by disabled people. We have a partnership with them. They provide our customers in some areas with life coaching, helping them think about the pros and cons of personal budgets. Now, I mean, that's a situation that works well all round. We get access to their expertise. ECDP get paid for doing what they do, and our customers get individual and impartial advice and guidance. Now, the risk for us is that kind of following that life coaching, that individuals will take the personal budget and they'll do that personal budget somewhere else. But taking that risk is part of the behaviour shift that provider organisations like Advance need to engage in. So, in another example, we had a group of our tenants in Leicester who came together with a common bond of facing mental health and facing the stigma and the prejudice that goes with that. We worked with them to support them coming together as a group. We helped them source some funding from different places, and they have over the years developed actually what's a very impressive range of training and resourcing toolkit for people that recognition of stigma. Now they've made that next step. They've become an independent organisation. They've set themselves up as a separate mutual organisation. We'll continue to work with them, but it's a very different relationship to the ones on their terms. As Advance, we get access to their training, to the materials that they develop, but it's on the licence and on the basis and that they need communication. And it is part of that shift in behaviour, that let them go and let other people take control. But I think the biggest shift in power comes not when organisations give power to other organisations, it's when organisations give power to individuals. And part of what we do is, as a social landlord, we provide rented housing. We have over 2,000 tenants across the country. But back in the late 90s, our then chief exec, Stuart Rigg, developed and pioneered a new approach around shared ownership, enabling disabled people to buy their own homes, not simply to be rented. And that actually has proved to be a really powerful concept. It's been a real success story, although ironically it's much more difficult to deliver in 2012 than it ever has been. But while we try very hard as a social landlord to be a kind of socially responsible landlord and to listen to our tenants, there's no doubting that the relationship that we have with our shared ownerships who own part of their property is very different from our tenants. We have less control and they have more choice. And again, it's part of a fundamental shift in letting go of changing our organisational and our personal behaviours.
Thank you. You okay to leave it there? Yeah. Okay. We're pushed for time, so I'm going to move on. And Sarah is an ambassador for the shared ownership scheme that you were just describing, and travels the country talking to audiences about what it means, what it's meant for you, and what it can mean for other people. So, Sarah.
Okay. Hello
everyone, I'm Sarah Cookson. I'd like to tell you a bit about my life and how my life has changed. Now that I'm living in my own home, I've now been living there 6 years, and I feel much more confidence in myself and what I've achieved in that time. At least 7 years ago, my parents and I felt that it was the right moment for me to become more independent and do things by myself, which I agree with. So we decided that we could find a flat for me to live in. We looked around Leatherhead, which is near to my family home and is a place that I know well. We managed to find the perfect little flat in a quiet area, just a 2-minute walk from the town. Mum and Dad gave me some more money towards the shared ownership schemes run by Father's Housing, who were really helpful to me and my family as well. So now I have my own home where I'm so happy. I moved in May 2006 and it was very exciting finding my stuff. I even had a second bed to become a state, which is important to me, especially important when my brother comes to stay. But I don't like to stay sometimes. I do like my space, and that can be quite annoying. But the thing that matters most to me is having my own space. People with Asperger's and learning disabilities need to work really very hard to make their way of life. And their sector support often makes me feel quite tired, so having my own space really is essential. To make the flats the way I wanted it, Dad decorated in my favourite colours, and it looks beautiful. I'm very definite about the things and colours that I like, and these stick firmly in my mind, so I want to change it. Having my own things that I use around me is very important. I'm very proud of my flats, and I love doing that. I do find day-to-day things difficult. I get support from county care and from the Surrey County Council. The teams are fantastic at the moment, and I have support workers and lots of family. They help me with the housekeeping, finances and social activities, which I could not do on my own, and all the form filling as well, which was really stressful, took a long time, even though we all have to fill forms then. In the last couple of years, I have the confidence to travel to nearby places on my own, like Dorking and Ashstead by bus and Guildford by train, all of which makes me feel very proud. Having my own money and budget is very important to me in the way that I run my life. The budget allows me to get and choose the extra things that go to make my life so interesting and full, and gives me the added independence I want, which is fantastic. The odd taxi, for example, which is very expensive. And having the money to pay someone from county care to come with me on a trip from time to time is very, very important. Since I've been in my own home, I feel like I've achieved so much and have managed to build up friendships with people of all ages. From people of my own age, right up to the pensioners who I've got to know. Occasionally, I help at the local church prayers, which is something that I really love doing. I also help out at Halo, a local charity set up by parents of young people with various disabilities. One of the parents who started Halo is David Hill, which, as I am a big fan of Formula 1, is very exciting. And he's a very nice man. A group of young people from Halo have just moved into our own home together, which is a big step forward for them. I enjoy being involved and being part of the Halo team to become my friends. So much of my life has been named English with the help and advice of the Little Group. He is a consultant in supported living for people with disabilities. She's become a great friend to me, as well as being fantastic help in so many parts of my life. I enjoy the conferences that we do together, which as well has given me the chance to speak about Asperger's syndrome and how it affects my day-to-day life, as well as the importance of being independent and living on my own. last of all, I would not have been able to come to the much without all the wonderful people who helped me to get where I am now. Particularly advanced housing and a team of Surrey County Council and County Care, and of course Haley, which is important. One more thing, it would make my biggest dream would be to meet David Cameron. And that would make me the happiest young lady, and that would definitely be the icing on the cake.
That's how I organise it.
That would be nice. Thank you for listening to me and for giving me the chance to come and talk to you today in this such wonderful place, and thank you for inviting us.
Sarah, thank you very much indeed for bringing the issues actually to life and giving us a sense of what it can mean, not just in terms of the practicalities, but also I think you were giving us a really good sense that independent living is very different from living alone, and through living independently you've been able to make all sorts of new relationships and friendships and achieve a lot, so thank you very much indeed. Now I should remind people that, because I forgot at the beginning, sorry about that, that if you're tweeting, which I'm sure lots of you are, the hashtag we suggest for this fringe is RP Fringe, and ResPublica is on res_publica. So tweet away by all means. Now I was just wondering, are there any points from other speakers that any of the panel want to pick up on at this point to respond to or build upon before we move to the questions from the floor? No? No? Okay. And I was slightly confused by my instructions at this point because I thought it was telling me there was going to be a moderate discussion, which would seem wholly unfitting to ResPublica and the Conservative Party conference. But of course I'm to moderate a discussion, so I'll do my best to keep it in order. We do, I think, have a microphone. Please do use the microphone for people who are hard of hearing in the audience. And can I have some questions or comments from the floor, please? Thank you. Gentleman at the front. If you could say who you are at the beginning of your comments, that'd be great.
Jeremy Chard, very long-term Conservative Party member from the Harrow area. 3 points I'd like to make. It's been my privilege over the last 2 years to actually be the fundraising manager for an organisation called Harrow Mencat that works with all people with learning disability, like we've been hearing about today. I'd just like to say, you know, that's wonderful what you were saying, Sarah. I have to have a chat afterwards, and only too pleased to tell you we've got a Prime Minister now that is really taking these issues seriously, and we're very lucky in this country. A couple of points I'd like to take up, maybe Tim and Stephen could come back to me on. What I'm learning by working with learning disability of all different types, an absolute diversity of mental illness and learning disability, or just as you talked about. I'm sort of organising different activities with people, such as running history sessions and taking people out to events, doing supermarket collections to give them experience and doing volunteering. And one of the issues that I feel very strongly about, we keep hearing, and rightly so, from the government about the benefit culture of getting people off benefits. You've got a lot of people with skills, very good skills. They may have a mental illness, but they've got skills, and I'm seeing it. Just to give you an example, couple of people, it will be quick, I promise, but it's a very good one. Couple of people with obviously mental illness are absolutely excellent at doing the cleaning, and they clean the canteen, empty the bins, and all it needs is supervision, and they do it voluntary. Now, why can't the government do more to place people like this who've got good skills into employment systems with supervision? Maybe what I'm hearing is not an area we're doing as much on as we should be.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to take questions, I think, in batches of 2 or 3. Could I have the next question, please, from the floor? I can't believe this room is stunned into silence.
Thank you. Farah Nazir from the MND Association. I'm also a local councillor. I just really wanted to direct a question to Thea and Stephen around personalisation. It's in 2 parts. The first is, it strikes me that personalisation could really work for people with conditions like MND. They're rare conditions, often the system doesn't work for them. But how will the system itself mobilise to help people with conditions like MND to use personalisation, to use the opportunities it presents? You could be assessed for a particular need one month, but your need might change quite rapidly. So how can we manage that? The second part of the question is around the market. So even now when people have social care budgets, they can't find the carers who are able to manage MND, they can't find the carers who are able to manage PEGs and NIV. So what can we do about that?
Thanks, Sarah. And we have one more.
Mila Vukovic, leukemia and lymphoma research. My question is to Stephen Dorrell. It's about integrated care. We talked from Norman Lamb that he wants to put integrated care at the heart of his mandate. We heard from Andy Burnham. He also wants to put integrated care at the heart of his health reforms. And of course, we heard you a lot of the times talking about integrated care. So from your perspective as the chairman of the Health Select Committee, what are the current biggest challenges on that road? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we've got some questions there, which I mean, the first question very much about how do we look for people's gifts and skills and what they can bring, as well as for people's needs and what they might what they might need in terms of support. In my own organisation, we support people to set up micro-enterprises, and many older and disabled people have actually, who would otherwise maybe have been written off and seen as people who would only be attending day centres or doing endless training courses, are actually now the directors of their own enterprises. And I think what we're starting to see is really what people can achieve. So there's something here about the kind of the assets approach, which I think might be worth taking in itself as a question. And I don't know if anybody wants to come back from the panel about that issue of how do we unlock the gifts and skills of people with disabilities and other long-term conditions. So, yeah, Stephen first and then...
It's an interesting progression of questions, actually, because in many ways the answer to each of the three questions is very similar. And if I can start with Jeremy's question, how do you ensure that the services provided offer support into work, effectively, is the core of your question, for people suffering from mental illness or learning disability? It's actually the same. The policy response, in my mind, is the same as how do you offer services that are accurately targeted and flexible enough to respond to changing requirements of people with MND. In both cases, what we need to be doing, instead of designing a service and slotting an individual into a service that's designed according to some prescribed formula, what we need to be doing is turning the system upside down so that it is an empowering organisation that is able to respond to the particular requirement of the individual with learning disability or the individual with MND, and is able to respond real time, because their requirements, the way in which we use public money to support those people to get the most out of their lives will change. And what's important is the determination to ensure that the public money is used in a way to commission a service that responds to their needs, rather than slotting them by means of a bureaucratic process into a pre-designed service, so that the public money is used to commission according to their need, and recognise that, as I said, it's a real-time process. So then you come to the question, well, what's the biggest inhibition to the world that I sought to describe in my opening remarks? How do we turn this into a system that empowers people to get more out of their lives, rather than simply provide a set of services? My answer to that question, and I'm in danger of being a stuck record on the subject, but I don't, in a sense, I don't apologise for that. We need to reimagine the service. If we're looking to get the service for the particular individual out of the pre-designed service that you simply slot people in, the day centre or the sheltered workshop or something. We need to apply that principle at the policy level as well, so that instead of having our 5 bureaucracies, as we have at the moment, social care, social housing, health, the community health, primary health, and the hospital service, we have a single commissioner process. The purpose of the commissioner being to sit alongside the individual, designing services for the individual, rather than designing services as institutions which then go out to recruit, in the worst case, recruit people to demonstrate that they're needed, when in fact those services are ill-fitted to the needs of the particular groups of people who are attending. If the commissioning process can be focused on the needs of the individual, changing real time, and be flexible, the thing that I'm least concerned about in this system is then getting service providers who will come forward with ideas about meeting those needs. Because if there's a commissioning process people believe in, with the huge amounts of public money that we commit to health and care as a priority, £120 billion a year, I don't believe that there aren't third sector, private sector, and indeed state organisations who will come forward with ideas about how those commissioners' requirements can be met. The challenge is to get the commissioner focused on people rather than service provision according to a formula.
Thank you, Stephen. Beautifully linking together all 3 of those questions there. And Tim, you wanted to go in?
Just say really on the employment question. I mean, if we take the issue of people with mental health issues, for example, if we talk to employers about employing people with mental health conditions, they would say actually they're a bit nervous about doing that. But given that probably at any point in time 20% of the workforce already have a mental health issue, it is a real issue. And so part of that is actually about raising awareness with employers and building line management confidence in terms of managing people with mental health conditions. I think that's the first thing. Just the second point, I think, echoing things that Stephen said really about ensuring that programme provision is flexible in response to particular. So we have actually some perfectly good employment provision that the government funds work towards access to work, with to making sure that those programmes are sufficiently resourced and invested in and continue to grow those, but the providers apply those programmes and funding in a way that meets the needs of individuals and requires tailored and flexible. And then the third point coming back to something the government can do more of, and arguably is in relation to universal credit, which is to make that transition from benefit to paid employment rather easier. At the moment it's very much that going from being reliant on benefits. It's a very, very big mistake for them to move on to paid employment.
Yeah, and there are all sorts of risks, I think, that people take when they try to move away from a long-term benefits entitlement, and particularly where that's based on an enterprise or a venture. There was a survey not so long ago of organisations whose aim or stated aim was to help people with learning disabilities get into employment, and it found that actually only about 2 or 3% of those organisations employed people with learning disabilities themselves in substantive roles, which says something about where ownership needs to lie within the sector. Thea, will you want to come in or go the next round? Do you want to come in now or a bit later? Okay. Moira at the front, and then we've got 2 and 3. So
hello, I'm Moira Fraser from Carers Trust. Having done quite a bit of work on personalisation, and we've got the target next year where everybody with a social care need has to have that met via a personal budget by early next year, and the vast majority of that in recent times has been met by a managed budget rather than by a direct payment. And the research shows that quite a large chunk of those people are not aware that they have a budget, and they're not aware of having ever been offered any choice. Are we just shuffling the deck chairs here? Are we going to end up with exactly the same system, having spent a lot of time and effort and frankly stress from the point of view of carers and disabled people on this whole personalisation project?
Yeah, I think one of the big worries, if the microphone can go back there, about, for me anyway, about the 100% personal budget target is not that it will be missed, but that it will be achieved and we won't notice any difference whatsoever. But, carry on.
I'm Anna Passingham from Independent Age. I'm just interested to hear from Stephen Dorrell about his view on the importance of access to high-quality advice and information to the future success of personalised care, specifically looking at, obviously, the importance of startup support, but actually ongoing support as well. So there's education at the beginning, but also ongoing support and access to that advice and information.
The draft social care bill is putting something in place which is aimed at ensuring that every area has something around information, advice and prevention, so there could be a change coming up there. And finally, towards the back.
Hi, Susanna Sconce from Action on Hearing Loss. How can we ensure that the personalisation of support in the future always includes access to more complex and costly interventions, such as different types of communication support?
Great, thank you. So we've got 3 questions that are perhaps more easily linked there, all around, I think, the mechanisms of choice around personal budgets and direct payments, and whether that will actually translate into real change. We know it has for some people, it's been transformative, but are we reaching, as some people suggest, the limits of how radical the radicalness of change that can happen? I didn't say that very well. Who's coming first? Thea, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, it would be desperately sad if we thought this was as radical as we were going to get, really, wouldn't it? Because there may be pockets of radicalisation, but they really are pockets. And in terms of the ability to really redesign or reimagine, as Stephen says, the system from the point of view of the patient and from the point of view of the carer, we're an enormously long way away. We're still exceptionally institutionalised focus, and we have very buildings-based solutions to many of the problems that we ever imagined. Coupled alongside that, we still have completely different incentive schemes in place for social care and for healthcare. We have one under local democratic control, we have one not under local democratic control. The idea that we simply are going to be able to move in one great bound towards it, I think, isn't going to happen. However, good people with good intention can make very radical things happen within the context we already have. And I think with a will to simply think differently.
Personal budgets were first sort of mooted as individual budgets. The integration of a number of different funding streams proved to be the one thing that was pretty much impossible to deliver and align. And I do wonder, though, particularly as we see a lot of other sectors taking a real interest in personalisation in social care, whether that moment to kind of revisit that has come again. Sarah, you were talking about kind of changes in your life, but also changes in some of your friends' lives and people around you making different choices. Do you think that these kinds of changes, where everybody gets to make a choice, are right for everyone, or do you think there are some people who just want what they've always had before?
It depends on what sort of disabilities and needs they've got, and if they like more help in doing things or less help. And I admire that young these campaigners who just moved into their own places. It's given them more independence, where families must be really careful as well.
Did you say that they've moved together as a group, or they're all in their own place?
Yeah.
Right, so that's
quite a pyramid that I know.
So, I mean, often personalisation is seen very much about having a place on your own, and for those young people, it was actually more about having a place together with their friends.
But probably their parents thought it was the right time that they had their own.
Yeah, fantastic, thank you. Stephen, you were
do that. Yes, are we simply repackaging this, doing the same thing and putting a different label on it? I'm with Thea. There'd be few things in life would make me suicidal, but that would be one. The idea that we've got to the end of radicalism, my sense of this is we haven't started. And if you imagine, you keep on using this phrase, reimagine, what it would look like if information flowed properly around the system. If when you answered a question of a social worker Your GP was told, your social housing unit was told, the community nurse was told, your carer was in the network, and you were then empowered to make a choice that at the moment you can't because you're told, no, it's on somebody else's budget, and then make the system sufficiently flexible to respond to those choices. I think you end up with a world that is unimaginably different in 10 years' time from what it is now. Just one of my favourite statistics. The National Audit Office say that 30% of non-emergency hospital admissions, acute hospital admissions, are avoidable. Now, bear in mind we spend £60 billion a year on the acute hospital sector, and 30% of its activity is avoidable. What does that tell you about what the scope is? I'm not seriously suggesting that you can close 30% of the acute hospital sector. That's not my suggestion. But that is the challenge thrown up by the NAO statistic, particularly when you bear in mind that this isn't just a theoretical statistic of a set of accountants. When in Torbay, they do joined-up care, not of the 5 bureaucracies, but 2 of the 5 bureaucracies. The 2 least challenging, actually, social care and community health. By joining those up, they cut acute hospital admissions in the Torbay region by 30%, you guessed it. So imagine what this world looks like if you start to follow through logically of how you use money more efficiently to meet patient requirement. I think Thea answered the question about what happens if somebody... It is, of course, completely... It's a total non sequitur to say we're going to empower you, to an individual, we're going to empower you to make choices. And that individual is then told the one choice you're not allowed to make is to ask somebody else to manage your service for you. That's an intellectual dead end. Of course, people will make that choice, but not all of them. And I'll bet you this, not as many of them as their carers, as their statutory support workers currently think will make that choice. And as people learn about how the system could work more flexibly in their interests, I think there will be a growing demand for people to make choices, and they will make different choices from the choices that professionals make on their behalf. Because as an individual, I will always make different choices about risk and reward from the choices that a professional can make on my behalf. And that's quite properly so, if you think about it.
There's an interesting contrast between our desire to deinstitutionalise all sorts of care and public services, except when it comes to hospitals, where we seem to have this strange emotional attachment to those buildings. But,
speak for yourself.
You were very, very careful there not to invite any tweets about closing 30% of hospitals. There. Very wise. Okay. So,
but also to remind people that there are some questions around.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got time, I think, for one more round of questions. We've got a gentleman at the very back, and we've got a gentleman here. Is there, could take one more in this round? Yeah, okay, so...
Thank you.
So.
Hello, thank you. My name's Jim Lane. I'm the awareness volunteer with the Prostate Cancer Charity. Very interesting to hear the debate, and I'd like to go back to what Stephen started with. Let's celebrate people living longer. You know, it's nice to hear. Especially as somebody who's been signed off now from cancer specialists because I've lived too long. You know, there might be other people in the room like that, and that actually does require a different kind of care. You know, when your hospital consultant says, "Well, you know, you've lived 5 years, you're off our books now," kind of thing. But I want to actually pick up that on a more serious point, really, because looking through the excellent little booklet here. I've just counted the number of photographs. There's about 30 individuals in there, of which I would reckon 26 of them are under the age of 60. 4 are probably over 60. That's one couple photographed twice. And if we look at the national demographic of people getting older, that's going to necessarily mean lots of older carers. You know, and that might require different kinds of support to what we've seen in the past. So I'll just throw that out as something for us to think about.
Thank you. I think Thea can probably claim to not have been involved in that design booklet design decision.
I wouldn't say such a thing. I wouldn't say such a thing.
But I take your point about the changing demographics.
I'm Paul Saper, LCS International. And can I follow on from that question and say that one of the problems with and we have in the system with the carers is the anxiety that once they start to reach a retirement age themselves or beyond, they have very, very great concerns how to look after individuals that they care for all their lives, and which is bringing great problems into the system. And I think if the government wants to do something really special within the social care system, it should be looking at should there be a requirement to actually at least check whether in fact the state can give more help to those that reach retirement age rather than sort of let things drift on.
Thank you. And finally, Claire.
Thank you. Claire Pelham, Chief Executive of Cheshire, a charity that supports disabled people. I think there's a danger when we talk about big numbers and 10, 20, 30 years on that we all get very strategic and long-term. And so I wondered if each of the panellists would like to say one thing that they will do in the next 6 months to make things better.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Claire. Right, so our final questions, I think we'll sort of go along the panel in order. A kind of a reminder and about celebrating living longer, but also thinking through the changing demographics. Something I think about sort of prevention and early intervention was what I was picking up from your question. And a challenge to say, let's not just think in this big picture all the time. Let's actually think about the fact that maybe we all have a shared personal responsibility in making change happen.
Thank you for pointing out the pictures, and I will take away and have a look at the pictures, because as this gentleman said, the issue is fundamentally older people looking after older people, and that is the biggest cohort that as an organisation, Carers Trust, we are focused on and that we deliver services to. Whenever I talk, and I've only been talking for 4.5 weeks now, people remember more that I said the youngest carer we support is 6 years old. They will remember that more than the majority that we support are older people looking after older people. And that's the nature of people's discourse. Somehow getting that in to people's mind, and the huge issue it is, and the huge amount of support that needs to go around that group is much harder to get across. So I couldn't do anything else but to agree. What I'm going to do in the next 6 months, of course, make Carers Trust the most extraordinarily successful charity that works with and for on behalf of all carers, but particularly older carers, and making sure that we promote the training and development support we do that will make personalisation real. So I can assure you we will do that in 6 months.
Thank you. Stephen?
I completely agree with what's been said about the carer community. It is Thea's reminded us there are carers of all ages, but the great majority of the caring activity is older people looking after older people. That's not to say that it isn't equally important to remember the intergenerational caring support arrangements that exist. That's why I place the emphasis I do on effective, flexible commissioning rather than tick-box processing. As for what I'm going to do, one of the joys of being a constituency member, a member of Parliament, is that you are both in the constituency every weekend when you have the opportunity to do something at a very local and very individual level. And doing the job I do in the Palace of Westminster in the Select Committee, I can do it at the strategic level as well. I shall go on. We've got to this moment without a Cato moment in this meeting. Virtually every time I'm on a public platform, I refer to the Roman senator of the 1st century BC, who used to end every speech with the words "Carthage must be defeated," because it was the existential challenge of the Roman Republic in the 1st century BC. The existential challenge of our health and care system is the Nicholson challenge. 4% efficiency gain 4 years running is what the government is committed to in order to ensure we can deliver the care we all want for all users of the health and care system within the cash available, never been delivered anywhere in the world. We are committed to doing it as a government, and the Health Select Committee has been referring to this on a regular basis since the beginning of this Parliament, and will do so next around Christmas this year, because it is, in my mind, the core challenge facing us all. At a more local level, I shall continue to work with my local health authority and social service department and social housing department to try to empower the local health and wellbeing board to deliver more joined up services. But we have a very long way to go.
Okay, brilliant. So Stephen's going to defeat Carthage, which is great, and Tim.
I didn't have anything quite so ambitious. I think actually he intended to get the kind of very complicated challenge that how do we continue that journey in changing our behaviours by loosening the rein that control it and enabling people to support and have that
That's a pretty worthy goal, I think, meeting lovely people, which I'm going to steal that one for myself as well. And I always notice that I have the most effect on people just simply by telling the stories of our members rather than getting too strategic. However tempting I find that. So that's pretty much all we've got time for. We've started, I think, a discussion, and very unusually from the point of celebration. How often do you hear that in conference sessions at the moment? And Sarah in particular, you helped us to celebrate some of the real changes that are happening in social care. And that for me ties into the sort of thinking which is getting called asset-based thinking, which essentially means let's just look for people's gifts and skills and what they can bring and what they might be able to do with those around them, rather than what they need from services. And I think that idea that actually there is abundance out there if only we knew where to look is perhaps more fruitful than trying to slice off the extra 0.1% from an outdated services budget. So the very last thing I wanted to say, Sarah, you were interested in meeting David Cameron.
Yes.
So Stephen has been on to David's office, and or Claire, by proxy, he's been texting away, and it looks so. I don't know if you're free at 2:45, but apparently there might be a to meet David there. So don't thank me. So that's great note on which to finish. Thank you very much to our speakers, to you for coming, for our hosts, and we'll enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.